Some secrets hide in plain sight for decades, buried beneath ordinary lives and quiet routines. In the small coastal town of Millfield Harbor, residents knew Sarah Chun as the friendly head librarian who organized book clubs and helped students with research. She wore cardigans, kept her graying hair in a neat bun, and had the softest voice in town. What they didn't know was that 25 years ago, she was Ghost, one of the most lethal intelligence operatives the military had ever trained. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. And sometimes it takes a chance encounter with someone from your past to remind you that no matter how deeply you bury who you used to be, that person never truly disappears. They just wait dormant until the moment they're needed again. Sarah thought her days of classified missions and life-or-death decisions were behind her. She was wrong. Dead wrong. Sarah Chun adjusted her reading glasses and glanced at the clock hanging above the circulation desk. 3:45. In 15 minutes, the after-school rush would begin, and the Millfield Harbor Public Library would transform from its peaceful afternoon sanctuary into a buzzing hive of backpack-wearing teenagers and harried parents. She enjoyed both versions of her workplace, but these quiet moments held a special place in her heart. The late September sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floors. Sarah had been the head librarian here for 18 years, and every detail of this place was as familiar to her as her own reflection. The way Mrs. Henderson always left her romance novels slightly askew on the return shelf. How young Tommy Martinez would sneak to the graphic novel section first, thinking no one noticed. The soft creak of the old building settling in the afternoon warmth. She picked up a stack of returned books and began her familiar routine of checking them back into the system. Her fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard, muscle memory guiding each keystroke. Mystery novel, cookbook, biography of a Civil War general, children's picture book about dinosaurs. Each book told a story not just within its pages, but about the person who had chosen it, read it, lived with it for a few weeks before bringing it back to share with the next reader. This was Sarah's life now. Peaceful, predictable, safe. She had built it carefully, brick by brick, year by year, creating something solid and permanent after decades of uncertainty. The people of Millfield Harbor knew her as the woman who could find any book you needed, who remembered everyone's reading preferences, who organized the annual summer reading program, and the monthly book club meetings that had become legendary for their passionate discussions and homemade cookies. They saw her graying hair, always pulled back in a practical bun. They noticed her comfortable shoes, chosen for long hours on her feet among the stacks. They appreciated her gentle manner with children and her patient help with the elderly residents who struggled with the new computer systems. To them, she was simply Sarah the librarian. Kind, reliable, unremarkable Sarah who had never married, who lived alone in the small cottage on Maple Street, who tended her garden and volunteered at the community center. What they couldn't see were the scars hidden beneath her long sleeves. The way her eyes automatically cataloged exit routes when she entered any room. How she still woke at exactly 0500 hours every morning, a habit that decades of civilian life hadn't been able to break. The locked box in her bedroom closet that she hadn't opened in 15 years but could access in under 30 seconds if needed. The front door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Elena Rodriguez walking in with her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia. Elena worked at the town's small medical clinic and had become one of Sarah's favorite patrons over the years. She was a single mother who prioritized her daughter's education above almost everything else, and Sarah admired her dedication. "Good afternoon, Ms. Chun," Sophia called out with the enthusiasm that only children possessed. She was already heading toward the children's section, her small backpack bouncing with each step. "Hello, sweetheart," Sarah replied warmly. "Looking for something new today? Mama said I can get 3 books this time because I finished all my homework early this week," Sophia announced proudly. Elena approached the desk with a tired but genuine smile. "She's been talking about coming here all day. I swear, you've created a monster. A reading monster, which I suppose is the best kind." Sarah chuckled softly. "There are worse problems to have. How's everything at the clinic? I heard Dr. Williams was thinking about retiring. He is actually, end of next year. The town council's been trying to find a replacement, but it's not easy convincing doctors to move to a place as small as Millfield Harbor." Elena lowered her voice slightly. "Between you and me, I'm a little worried about what happens if they can't find someone. This town needs medical care. Before Sarah could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the afternoon rush. Within minutes, the library filled with the familiar sounds of children chattering, parents discussing homework assignments, and teenagers claiming tables for study groups. Sarah moved seamlessly into her public role, helping a confused freshman find resources for a history project, mediating a minor dispute over computer time, and checking out a steady stream of books. It was nearly 6 o'clock when the library finally quieted down again. Sarah was shelving returns when she heard Elena call her name from the front desk. "Miss Chun, have you seen Sophia? She was in the children's section, but I can't find her now." Sarah felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Her training kicked in automatically, sharpening her awareness even as she kept her voice calm and reassuring. "I'm sure she's just found a good hiding spot with a book. You know how kids can disappear when they're reading. Let me help you look." They searched the children's section thoroughly, checking behind the low shelves and in the cozy reading nooks. Sarah expanded the search to the teen area, the reference section, even the small staff break room. Elena's calm began to crack as they came up empty. "This isn't like her," Elena said, her voice tight with worry. "She always tells me where she's going. She knows the rules about staying where I can see her." Sarah's mind was already working through possibilities and protocols, her civilian librarian persona falling away like a shed coat. She noticed things she had missed before, the back emergency exit that she always kept locked but could be opened from the inside. The new maintenance worker who had been in earlier, someone she didn't recognize. The way the afternoon sun created blind spots near the tall windows. "Elena, I need you to call the police," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a note of authority that made Elena look at her with surprise. "Ask for Officer Martinez specifically. Tell him Sarah Chun requested him personally. Do it now." But maybe she just wandered outside, or now Elena. Something in Sarah's tone made Elena reach for her phone without further argument. While Elena made the call, Sarah walked to the front windows and scanned the street outside with eyes that saw details most people missed. The placement of parked cars, the sight lines from the library to various escape routes, the normal foot traffic patterns for this time of evening. Officer Martinez arrived within 5 minutes, his young face serious and focused. Sarah had known him since he was a teenager checking out car magazines and dreaming of police work. Now he was one of Millfield Harbor's 3 full-time officers, and she had watched him grow into the job with pride. "Ms. Chun, Elena said you asked for me specifically?" His tone was respectful but curious. Sarah nodded, appreciating that he didn't waste time on pleasantries. 8-year-old girl, missing approximately 20 minutes. Mother last saw her in the children's section. "I've done a complete search of the building. She's not here. Any reason to think this is more than a wandering child?" Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Unknown maintenance worker in the building earlier today. I didn't recognize him, and I know everyone who works on this building. Back exit was checked at closing yesterday, but I haven't verified it today." Martinez's expression sharpened. He was young, but he was smart enough to pick up on the military precision in Sarah's report. "I'll call for backup and start a wider search. Can you show me where you last saw this maintenance worker?" As they moved through the library, Sarah found herself falling into old patterns of thinking. Threat assessment, asset protection, tactical awareness. Skills she had spent 18 years trying to forget were surfacing as naturally as breathing. They discovered that the back exit, which should have been securely locked, was slightly ajar. The lock mechanism showed signs of tampering, subtle, but clear to someone who knew what to look for. Sarah ran her fingers along the door frame, reading the marks like a language most people couldn't understand. "This was open from the outside," she told Martinez quietly. "Professional work. Someone who knew what they were doing." "How can you tell?" Martinez asked, then seemed to catch himself. "Ms. Chun, you seem to know a lot about this kind of thing." Before Sarah could answer, Elena's voice cut through the evening air from somewhere outside the building. "Sophia. Sophia, where are you?" The panic in her voice made Sarah's jaw tighten. She looked at Martinez with eyes that held depths the young officer had never seen before. "Officer Martinez, I need you to expand your search immediately. This isn't a lost child. This is an abduction, and we're already behind the timeline." "How can you be so sure?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing decisions and consequences. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a past she had never shared with anyone in this town. "Because I know the difference between a child who's hiding with a book and a child who's been taken by someone with training. and the person who took Sophia has definitely been trained. Martinez stared at her, suddenly, seeing something in the quiet librarian that he had never noticed before. Miss Chun, who exactly are you? Sarah looked out into the gathering dusk, her mind already working through search patterns and tactical considerations that belong to a different life. Right now, I'm someone who's going to help you find that little girl. But first, you need to call your chief and tell him to contact the state police. And tell him to request any available federal resources in the area. Federal resources? For a missing child in Millfield Harbor. Sarah met his eyes, and for the first time in 18 years, she let a hint of her old self show through. Trust me, Officer Martinez. When I tell you this is bigger than a lost child, you could take that to the bank. As sirens began to wail in the distance, and Elena's voice continued calling for her daughter, Sarah felt the careful wall she had built around her old life beginning to crack. She had spent nearly 2 decades being just a librarian, but some skills never truly went away. They just waited in the shadows, ready to emerge when innocent people needed protecting. Looking at the tampered lock, and thinking about Sophia's bright smile and eager love of books, Sarah realized that after 18 years of hiding, Ghost was about to come back from the dead. The state police arrived within an hour, their presence transforming the quiet library parking lot into a command center blazing with emergency lights. Sarah watched from the library steps as officers set up equipment and coordinated search teams, her trained eye automatically cataloging their procedures. They were good, but they were also operating with incomplete information. They didn't understand what they were really dealing with. Elena sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening, answering questions from Detective Ray Kowalski, a 15-year veteran who had driven up from the state police barracks in Concord. Sarah could see the detective's frustration growing as Elena repeated the same story. Sophia had been reading in the children's section. Elena had been distracted by a phone call from the clinic for maybe 10 minutes. And when she looked up, her daughter was gone. Ma'am, children don't just vanish in a thin air, Detective Kowalski was saying, his voice gentle but insistent. Kids get distracted. They wander off. They hide in places parents don't think to look. Are you absolutely certain you've checked everywhere she might have gone? Detective, Sarah interrupted, approaching the group with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. I've worked with children for 18 years. I know how they behave, and I know this building better than anyone alive. Sophia Rodriguez didn't wander off. She was taken. Kowalski looked up at her with mild irritation. And you are? Sarah Chun, head librarian and the person who discovered the evidence of forced entry. Right? Officer Martinez mentioned you found something in the back door. I'd like to take a look at that myself. As they walked back into the library, Sarah felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. It was a sensation she remembered well from her previous life, when military commanders would see a small, quiet woman and assume she was there to file paperwork or serve coffee. She had learned to use those assumptions to her advantage, and that skill was coming back to her now. The back exit door stood open, bathed in the harsh white light of police flood lamps. Detective Kowalski crouched next to the lock mechanism, studying the scratches and tool marks that Sarah had pointed out to Officer Martinez. These marks could be from regular maintenance, he said after a moment, or from someone who lost their keys and had to jimmy the lock. It's not necessarily evidence of crime. Sarah bit back her first response and chose her words carefully. Detective, with respect, those marks were made by someone using a professional lockpick set, not a jimmy. The scoring pattern is consistent with a tension wrench and rake pick applied by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some opportunist trying to break in. This was planned. Kowalski stood up and looked at her with new attention. You seem to know a lot about lock picking for a librarian. You pick up all kinds of knowledge when you spend your life around books, Sarah replied evenly, including books on security systems and criminal investigation techniques. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Sarah had learned about lockpicking during a 3-week urban infiltration course at a facility that didn't appear on any official maps, taught by an instructor whose name she had never learned. But Detective Kowalski didn't need to know that. Before Kowalski could respond, his radio crackled to life. Detective, we've got something. Black sedan was seen leaving the area around the time of the disappearance. Witness says it was driving fast, heading toward Route 16. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Route 16 led to the highway, and the highway led everywhere. If they were dealing with professionals, and Every instinct she had was screaming that they were. Then Sophia could be hundreds of miles away within hours. I need to expand the search area, Kowalski said, more to himself than to Sarah. Amber Alert, roadblocks, the whole 9 yards. Detective, Sarah said carefully, before you do that, there's something you should consider. If this was a random abduction, expanding the search makes sense. But if this was targeted, if someone specifically chose Sophia for a reason, then broadcasting her disappearance might put her in more danger. What kind of reason? She's 8 years old. What could anyone want with an 8-year-old girl from a town like this? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the words died in her throat as she saw a figure walking across the parking lot toward them. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the economical grace of someone who had spent decades in combat zones. Even in civilian clothes, even after 25 years, she would have recognized that silhouette anywhere. Commander Jake Morrison, or rather, former Commander Morrison, though she doubted he would ever really stop being military. He was older now, gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into desert sun and Arctic wind. But the core of him was unchanged, the alert posture, the way his eyes swept the scene and cataloged every detail, the presence that made people unconsciously step aside to give him room. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and Sarah watched recognition dawn on his face like sunrise. His step faltered for just a moment before he continued toward them, but that moment was enough to tell her that he was as shocked to see her as she was to see him. Detective Kowalski? Morrison's voice was exactly as she remembered it. Deep, calm, carrying an authority that made people want to follow orders they hadn't even been given yet. Commander Jake Morrison, Naval Special Warfare. I believe you requested federal assistance. Kowalski shook his hand with obvious relief. Commander, I have to say, I didn't expect anyone to respond this quickly. We've got a missing 8-year-old, possible abduction, but I'm not sure this rises to the level of, let me be the judge of that, Morrison interrupted smoothly. His gaze flicked to Sarah, and she saw the questions in his eyes. Brief me on what you found so far. As Kowalski walked Morrison through the timeline and evidence, Sarah felt the careful balance of her life tilting dangerously. Morrison's presence here wasn't a coincidence. Federal resources didn't respond to missing child cases in small New England towns within hours unless someone with serious pull made specific requests. And the only reason Morrison would be here, the only reason he would have known to come, was if someone had connected Sophia's disappearance to Sarah's past, which meant someone knew exactly who Sarah Chun really was. Someone knew that the quiet librarian was actually former Special Operations Officer Chen Luan, call sign Ghost, who had spent 12 years conducting classified missions in places that didn't officially exist. Someone who knew that getting to Ghost meant going through the people she cared about. Ma'am, Morrison said suddenly, turning his attention to Sarah, I understand you discovered the evidence at the back door. Could you show me what you found? It was a perfectly professional request, but Sarah heard the underlying message. He needed to talk to her privately, away from local law enforcement ears. She nodded and led him back into the library, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. Once they were inside, away from the chaos of the parking lot, Morrison stopped pretending this was a routine case. Jesus Christ, Li Wen, he said quietly, using her real name for the first time in 25 years. When I got the call that Ghost might be active again, I thought someone was pulling my leg. You've been here the whole time? Running a library? Sarah Chun has been here, she corrected. Ghost died in 2001, remember? Officially and permanently. Morrison ran a hand through his graying hair. Well, she's about to be resurrected, because someone clearly knows exactly who you are and where to find you. This isn't random, and it's not some local creep looking for an easy target. Professional entry, clean extraction, probably military-trained operators. Sound familiar? Sarah leaned against one of the reading tables, feeling the weight of 18 years of careful normalcy crashing down around her. Who called you, Jake? Deputy Director Harrison at NSA. She said an asset codenamed Ghost might be compromised and in need of immediate support. When I asked for details, she told me to get my ass to Millfield Harbor, Massachusetts, and figure it out myself. Harrison's still active? Just took over the deputy director position last month. Apparently, one of her first priorities was reviewing old files and updating threat assessments for former assets. Your name came up on a list of people who might be targeted for leverage or revenge. Sarah closed her eyes, pieces of a puzzle she had hoped never to see again clicking into place. How long has this list existed? I don't know. But Lewin, if someone took that little girl to get to you, we need to figure out who and why, and we need to do it fast. Because if they're willing to kidnap a child, they're not planning to negotiate. Through the library windows, Sarah could see Elena still sitting in the ambulance, her face hollow with worry and fear. Sophia was out there somewhere, frightened and alone because of choices Sarah had made in a different life. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar, hated burden. There's something else, Morrison continued. Harrison said there's been chatter on some dark web channels about ghost sightings. Someone's been asking questions, putting out feelers, trying to confirm your location and status. This has been building for months. And nobody thought to warn me. Morrison's expression darkened. According to the files, Sarah Chin doesn't exist. You're listed as a civilian with no known connection to any government activities. Someone buried your trail so deep that even NSA couldn't find you until they started looking specifically. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Someone with serious access to classified systems. Someone who wanted me to disappear completely. Or someone who wanted to be able to find you when they needed you, without anyone else knowing where you were. Before Sarah could respond, Officer Martinez appeared in the library doorway. Ms. Chun, we got a problem. Elena Rodriguez just received a phone call. They followed Martinez back to the parking lot, where Elena was staring at her cell phone with a mixture of terror and confusion. Detective Kowalski was already at her side, his notebook out. Tell them what you told me, Kowalski said gently. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. A man called. He said he had Sophia. He said she was safe for now, but that would change if I called the FBI or if the story went public. He said someone would contact me with instructions, but not me. He said they would contact the person who this was really about. She looked up at Sarah with eyes full of questions and fear. He said they would contact the person who used to be called Ghost. The parking lot went silent except for the buzz of radio chatter and the distant sound of search teams calling Sophia's name. Sarah felt every I turned toward her, felt the weight of questions she couldn't answer and explanations she couldn't give. Morrison stepped closer to her, his voice low and urgent. Leewon, whatever you did during your active years, whoever you pissed off or left unfinished business with, now's the time to remember. Because they've got an innocent child, and they're going to use her to settle an old score. Sarah stared out into the darkness beyond the police lights, her mind traveling back through years of missions and operations, enemies made and threats neutralized. Somewhere in that maze of classified activities was the reason why 8-year-old Sophia Rodriguez was sitting in a stranger's car, afraid and alone. I need access to my old files, she said finally. All of them. Every mission, every operation, every target. If someone's coming for Ghost, I need to know who and why. That might not be possible. Most of those files are buried so deep. Then, unbury them, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a steel that made Morrison straighten involuntarily. Because right now, a little girl is paying the price for my past, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let her suffer because some bureaucrat thinks information should stay classified. She turned to face the assembled law enforcement officers, all of whom were staring at her with varying degrees of confusion and suspicion. The quiet librarian they thought they knew was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, and absolutely determined. Detective Kowalski, I need you to coordinate with Commander Morrison on all further operations. This is now a federal case with national security implications. Officer Martinez, I need you to provide security for Elena Rodriguez and maintain communications protocols with the kidnappers when they call again. She paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. And, gentlemen, I need you all to understand something. For the next however long this takes, I'm not Sarah the librarian. I'm someone with a very particular set of skills, and I'm going to use every one of them to bring Sophia home safely. But that means you're going to see and hear things that you'll never be allowed to talk about. Are we clear? The silence stretched for a long moment before Morrison nodded slowly. Crystal clear. Welcome back, Ghost. The Millfield Harbor Town Hall had never hosted a federal command center before. By 10 o'clock that evening, the main conference room had been transformed into something that looked more like a military operation than a small-town emergency response. Laptops, secure communication devices, and tactical maps covered every available surface. Morrison had somehow produced a team of 6 specialists who had arrived without fanfare and immediately began establishing secure communications links to various government agencies. Sarah sat at the head of the conference table, reviewing files that had been classified beyond her security clearance for over 2 decades. Seeing her own mission reports again felt like reading someone else's diary, except that someone else happened to be one of the most effective deep-cover operatives the military had ever trained. Operation Nightfall, Syria, 2001, she murmured, scanning a heavily redacted document. 3-month infiltration of arms trafficking network. Primary target eliminated, secondary targets scattered. Morrison looked up from his own stack of files. Any of those secondary targets ever resurface? 2 of them. Mahmoud Kassab was killed in a drone strike in 2003. Viktor Petrov disappeared into the Russian underworld and was presumed dead by 2005. Sarah paused, her finger tracing a line of text. But there was a 3rd one. Dmitry Volkov, arms dealer, information broker, and, according to this file, he had connections to human trafficking networks. What kind of connections? The worst kind. He specialized in acquiring assets for leverage. Political figures, children, military families, intelligence officers' relatives. Anyone who could be used to influence or control people in positions of power. Detective Kowalski, who had been quietly observing the federal takeover of his case, leaned forward. Are you saying this guy might have taken Sophia to get to you specifically? Sarah continued reading, her expression growing darker with each page. Volkov escaped during the final phase of Nightfall. I had him cornered in a warehouse outside Aleppo, but he managed to slip away in the chaos after we eliminated his boss. According to this debrief, he swore revenge against the operative who cost him his organization and his fortune. That would be you, Morrison said unnecessarily. That would be Ghost, Sarah corrected. As far as Volkov knew, Ghost was a legend. An operator so deep undercover that even other intelligence agencies weren't sure if the person existed. No real name, no background, no way to track or target. Morrison's secure phone buzzed, and he stepped away to take the call. While he was gone, Sarah continued reviewing files, but her mind kept returning to Sophia's bright smile and enthusiasm for books. Somewhere out there, an 8-year-old girl was frightened and confused because of a promise of revenge made in a Syrian warehouse over 20 years ago. Ms. Chun, Detective Kowalski said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Sarah looked up from the files, seeing genuine concern in the detective's eyes rather than suspicion. Go ahead. How dangerous is this guy? If he's got Sophia, what are we really dealing with? Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Dmitry Volkov is the kind of man who burns down entire villages to send a message. He's patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. If he's behind this, then Sophia is safe as long as she's useful to him, but the moment that changes... She didn't finish the sentence, but Kowalski understood. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand, suddenly looking older than his 40-something years. What do we get her back? By giving Volkov what he wants. Which is... Sarah met his eyes steadily. Me? Morrison returned to the table, his expression grim. That was Deputy Director Harrison. We got positive identification on Volkov. He's been operating under the identity of Anton Mikhailov, supposedly a legitimate international businessman with interests in shipping and logistics. In reality, he's been running a sophisticated network specializing in kidnapping and extortion. Where is he? That's the problem. He's been incredibly careful to stay mobile and maintain operational security. No fixed base of operations, no permanent residence, just a series of safe houses and temporary facilities. But Harrison's team has been tracking communications intercepts, and they think he's somewhere in the northeastern United States. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Elena Rodriguez was still waiting for news about her daughter. He won't stay hidden for long. He didn't take Sophia to remain anonymous. He took her to draw me out, which means he's planning to make contact soon. As if summoned by her words, Officer Martinez's radio crackled to life. All units, we've got activity on Elena Rodriguez's phone. Incoming call from unknown number. They rushed back to the parking lot, where Elena was staring at her ringing phone with obvious terror. Morrison quickly attached a recording device, while one of his specialists prepared to trace the call. Answer it, Sarah said gently. But remember, don't promise anything and don't agree to anything without talking to me first. Elena nodded and answered the call with trembling fingers. Hello, Mrs. Rodriguez, came a voice with a slight Eastern European accent. I trust you have been thinking about our conversation. Please, Elena said, her voice breaking. Please just tell me my daughter is okay. She is perfectly safe. She is a lovely child, very intelligent. She has been telling me about her favorite books. Did you know she particularly enjoys stories about brave princesses? Sarah felt her jaw clench. Even through the brief description, she could hear the calculated cruelty in Volkov's words. He was letting Elena know that he had been talking to Sophia, that he had access to intimate details about her daughter's life and personality. What do you want? Elena asked. I want to speak with Sarah Chun. Or perhaps I should say, I want to speak with a woman who used to call herself Ghost. Put her on the phone. Elena looked at Sarah with desperate eyes. Sarah nodded and took the phone. This is Sarah Chun. Huh? Ghost. Or should I say, former Ghost? I must admit, I am impressed by your transformation. From feared operative to small-town librarian. Quite the career change. Cut the bullshit, Volkov. What do you want? A soft laugh. Straight to business. I always appreciated that about you, even when you were destroying my life's work. What I want is simple, a meeting. Just you and me discussing old times. And in exchange, the child goes home to her mother, unharmed and with a lovely story to tell about the nice man who let her read books while they waited. Sarah felt Morrison's hand on her arm, a warning to be careful, but she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Where and when? I will send coordinates to this phone in exactly 1 hour. You will come alone, unarmed, and you will not attempt to trace this call or follow me afterward. If I detect any surveillance or backup, the child will disappear permanently. Do we understand each other? We understand each other. Excellent. Oh, and Ghost, do not underestimate me, as you did in Syria. I have had 20 years to plan this moment, and I do not intend to waste it. The line went dead. Elena immediately grabbed Sarah's arm. You can't go. It's a trap. He'll kill you both. Maybe, Sarah said quietly. But if I don't go, he'll definitely kill Sophia. Morrison was already shaking his head. Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with terrorists, and we don't send assets into obvious ambushes. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Jake. You know it, and I know it. Volkov has been planning this for 2 decades. He's not going to be caught by a surveillance team or fooled by a decoy. He wants me, and he's willing to kill an innocent child to get me. Then we find him first. We've got the full resources of the intelligence community working on this. Sarah looked around at the assembled law enforcement officers, the federal agents, the sophisticated equipment, and tactical expertise. All of it impressive, all of it professional, and none of it capable of finding a man who had spent 20 years becoming invisible. Commander, with all due respect, Volkov has been 1 step ahead of the intelligence community for 2 decades. He's not going to be found unless he wants to be found. And right now, he wants to be found by me. She turned to Detective Kowalski. I need you to promise me something. When I don't come back from this meeting, I need you to make sure Elena and Sophia get all the protection they need. Volkov might decide that eliminating witnesses is tidier than leaving loose ends. Ms. Chun, detective, I've spent 18 years building a life in this town. I've grown to love this place and the people in it. I'm not going to let my past destroy that. If going to this meeting is the price for keeping everyone safe, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. Morrison stepped in front of her, his expression intense. Lee-Won, listen to me. This isn't just about you anymore. If Volkov kills you, it sends a message to every terrorist and criminal organization in the world that they can target former intelligence assets with impunity. You represent something bigger than yourself. Right now, I represent the only chance an 8-year-old girl has of seeing her mother again. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. GPS coordinates and a simple instruction. 1 hour. Come alone. She looked at the coordinates and felt a chill of recognition. The location was the old Millfield Harbor Lighthouse, abandoned for 15 years and sitting on a rocky outcrop that was only accessible by a single narrow road. Perfect for a meeting where the host wanted to control all the variables. I know this place, she said quietly. It's isolated, defensible, and has excellent sight lines in all directions. If Volkov has set up there, he'll see anyone coming from miles away. Which makes it perfect for an ambush, Morrison pointed out. Or perfect for a negotiation where both parties want to ensure they're not being deceived. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. Elena's desperate hope, Morrison's frustrated concern, Detective Kowalski's genuine worry, and the carefully neutral expressions of the federal agents. They were all good people doing their best to handle an impossible situation, but none of them understood the fundamental truth that Sarah had learned during 12 years of classified operations. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant accepting that you probably wouldn't survive to see the results. "I need 45 minutes to prepare," she said finally. "Commander Morrison, I need you to coordinate with local authorities to establish a perimeter around the lighthouse area, but keep everyone at least 2 miles back. Detective Kowalski, I need you to make sure Elena has constant protection until this is resolved. Officer Martinez, I need you to monitor all communications and be ready to move fast if this goes sideways." "And what if you don't come back?" Morrison asked quietly. Sarah smiled, and for a moment the hard-edged operative disappeared, replaced by the gentle librarian who had spent 18 years helping children find their favorite books. "Then, you make sure Elena knows that Sophia was worth it. And you make sure Sophia grows up knowing that sometimes people are willing to sacrifice everything to keep children safe." She looked out toward the harbor, where moonlight was dancing on the dark water. In less than an hour, she would be walking back into the world she had tried so hard to leave behind. The quiet life she had built was about to end, but if it ended with Sophia Rodriguez safe in her mother's arms, then it would have been a life well lived. "I need to get some things from my house," she said. Things that Sarah the librarian wouldn't have, but Ghost always kept ready. Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll drive you." As they walked toward his car, Sarah felt the familiar weight of impending action settling over her. The 18 years of peace had been wonderful, but they were over now. It was time for Ghost to finish what she had started in a Syrian warehouse 20 years ago. Sarah's cottage on Maple Street looked exactly as it always had. White picket fence, carefully tended garden, the kind of home that belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting. But as Morrison followed her up the front walkway, Sarah was already transforming back into someone he remembered from 2.5 decades ago. Her posture was different, her movements more economical, her awareness heightened to the point where she seemed to catalog every shadow and sightline. "Jake," she said as she unlocked the front door, "when we go inside, you're going to see things that will raise questions. I need you to understand that those questions can't be answered in official reports." Morrison nodded. "Understood. This conversation never happened, and anything I see here doesn't exist." The interior of the cottage was as warm and welcoming as expected, decorated with comfortable furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and the accumulated treasures of a life lived quietly. But Sarah led Morrison past the living room and into her bedroom, where she opened the closet door and moved aside a row of cardigans and sensible dresses. Behind the clothes was a wall panel that looked like ordinary drywall, but opened at Sarah's touch to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a metal case that hadn't been opened in 15 years, but Sarah's hands moved over the locks as if she had accessed it yesterday. "Jesus," Morrison breathed as Sarah opened the case. Inside was everything a deep-cover operative would need for extended solo missions. Multiple sets of identity documents, currencies from a dozen countries, encrypted communication devices, medical supplies, and weapons that definitely weren't available through normal civilian channels. Sarah pulled out a compact pistol and checked the action with practiced efficiency. CCWP-226. Still my preferred sidearm, though I'm hoping not to need it tonight. "Luan, if you're planning to go unarmed, I'm planning to survive long enough to get Sophia out," Sarah interrupted. Volkov said come alone and unarmed, but he didn't specify what his definition of unarmed might be. And after 20 years, I think I know him well enough to guess that he won't be following his own rules. She selected several other items from a case. A small knife that could pass for a letter opener, a communication device disguised as a pen, and a small medical kit that included both emergency supplies and items that could be weaponized in desperate circumstances. "How long have you had this stuff?" Morrison asked. "Since the day I officially died. My handler at the time thought it would be wise for Ghost to maintain emergency capabilities just in case." Small tongue. She was. Unfortunately, she really did die 6 years ago, which is probably how someone was able to dig deep enough to find me. Sarah closed the case and returned it to its hiding place, then changed clothes with military efficiency. The cardigan and comfortable slacks disappeared, replaced by dark clothing that would blend into shadows and allow for freedom of movement. When she turned back to Morrison, the transformation was complete. The gentle librarian was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she could disappear into the night and emerge somewhere else entirely. Jake, I need you to promise me something. Name it. If this goes bad, if Volkov kills me and takes Sophia anyway, I need you to hunt him down and finish this. Not for revenge, but because he won't stop with me. He'll keep taking innocent people to settle old scores, and eventually he'll target someone you care about. Morrison met her eyes. It won't come to that. Maybe not. But if it does, I need to know that someone I trust will see it through. They drove to the lighthouse in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah spent the time reviewing everything she knew about Volkov's methods and psychology, trying to anticipate his next moves. Morrison focused on the tactical situation, mentally positioning his support teams and calculating response times. The lighthouse sat on a rocky promontory that jutted into the Atlantic, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that was only passable at low tide. During high tide, it became an island, which Sarah realized was probably not a coincidence. Volkov had chosen his location well, isolated, defensible, and with built-in escape routes if things went wrong. Morrison stopped the car at the base of the causeway. From here, Sarah would walk the remaining quarter-mile alone, visible to anyone watching from the lighthouse, but unable to bring backup or support. Radio check, Morrison said, handing her a nearly invisible earpiece. We'll be monitoring, but we can't move unless you give us the signal. And the signal is? You stop talking. If we lose contact with you for more than 60 seconds, we assume the worst and move in fast. Sarah fitted the earpiece and tested the connection, then checked her concealed weapons one final time. Everything was as ready as it could be, given the circumstances. We win, Morrison said as she opened the car door. For what it's worth, it's good to see Ghost again. I forgot how much I missed working with you. Sarah smiled, and for a moment her expression was purely human, without any of the operational hardness. Take care of yourself, Jake. And if I don't make it back, tell Elena that her daughter was braver than most soldiers I've known. The walk across the causeway felt both endless and far too short. Sarah maintained a steady pace, her eyes constantly scanning for threats while her mind ran through possible scenarios and responses. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its weathered white tower stark against the star-filled sky. She was halfway across when she spotted the first surveillance device, a small camera mounted on a rock outcropping, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. Volkov was watching her approach, probably had been watching since she left the car. She resisted the urge to wave. The lighthouse door stood slightly open, spilling yellow light onto the rocky ground. Sarah paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming that she was walking into a trap, but the image of Sophia's frightened face pushed her forward. Come in, Ghost, came Volkov's voice from somewhere inside. We have much to discuss. The interior of the lighthouse had been converted into a comfortable living space, though it retained its industrial character. Camping equipment, electronic devices, and enough supplies for an extended stay were arranged with military precision. At the center of it all sat Dmitry Volkov, looking remarkably like the man she remembered from Syria, just older and more refined. He was tall, lean, with silver-gray hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from years of getting away with terrible things. His clothes were expensive but practical, and Sarah noted the way he sat with his back to the wall and clear sight lines to both the door and the stairs leading up to the lighthouse beacon. 23 years, he said conversationally. That is how long I've been planning this conversation. Where's the girl? Volkov smiled and gestured toward the stairs. Safe. Sleeping, actually. She's quite tired from all the excitement. Children adapt so remarkably well to new situations, don't you think? Sarah forced herself to remain calm, though every fiber of her being wanted to rush upstairs and confirm that Sophia was alive and unharmed. What do you want, Dmitri? What I have always wanted. Justice. Compensation for what you took from me. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what my life has been like since Syria? Running, hiding, rebuilding everything you destroyed. Always looking over my shoulder for the next ghost to emerge from the shadows. You were trafficking weapons to terrorist organizations. You deserved everything you got. Perhaps. But you cost me more than just money and connections. You cost me my reputation, my position, my sense of security. Do you know how difficult it is to rebuild a criminal empire when no one trusts you to protect your own operations? Sarah remained standing, positioning herself between Volkov and the stairs. I'm here. You've got what you wanted. Let the girl go. Oh, but I haven't got what I wanted. Not yet. Volkov stood up, revealing that he was indeed armed, with a pistol holstered at his hip. What I want is for you to experience what you put me through. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that everything you've built can disappear in an instant. You already have. Taking Sophia destroyed everything I built here. The quiet life, the sense of security, the belief that I could leave the past behind. You've already won. Have I? Volkov moved closer, close enough that Sarah could see the cold calculation in his eyes. Because from where I stand, you look exactly like the same dangerous woman who cost me everything. Still confident, still ready to fight, still believing you can save everyone. Sarah heard a soft sound from upstairs, the creak of footsteps on old wooden floors. Her heart jumped, hoping it was Sophia, but Volkov's slight smile told her she wasn't going to like what came next. I brought some associates, he said casually. Insurance, you might say. Men who are very good at ensuring that conversations proceed as planned. Two figures appeared at the top of the stairs, military contractors by their bearing and equipment, armed with automatic weapons and wearing tactical gear. They positioned themselves to cover both Sarah and the exits, professional and efficient. Now, then, Volkov continued, let us discuss the terms of our arrangement. There are no terms. Let Sophia go, and you can do whatever you want with me. Oh, but that would be too simple. You see, Ghost, I don't just want revenge. I want to rebuild my organization, and for that I need resources and connections. Which brings me to my proposal. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. I'm listening. You're going to help me reestablish my network. Your government contacts, your knowledge of intelligence operations, your skills at infiltration and elimination. In exchange, the child lives and goes home to her mother. And if I refuse? Volkov's expression didn't change, but something cold and final shifted behind his eyes. Then, we discover how much pain an 8-year-old can endure before she tells her mother's friend that she wants to go home. The threat hung in the air like a physical thing. Sarah felt the familiar rage building in her chest, the cold fury that had made Ghost one of the most effective killers the military had ever trained. But she also heard Morrison's voice in her earpiece, barely audible, but urgent. Sarah, talk to me. Status report. She had perhaps 30 seconds before Morrison would assume she was compromised and send in the cavalry. 30 seconds to find a way to save Sophia without starting a firefight that would get them both killed. I want to see her, Sarah said. I want proof that she's alive and unharmed before I agree to anything. Volkov considered this, then nodded to one of his men. Bring the child down, but keep her close. A few moments later, Sofia Rodriguez appeared at the top of the stairs, looking small and frightened but unharmed. When she saw Sarah, her face lit up with relief and hope. Ms. Chun, I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't leave me here. The trust in Sophia's voice hit Sarah like a physical blow. This child believed that the friendly librarian would save her, had no idea that the friendly librarian was actually a trained killer who had made enemies capable of using 8-year-olds as weapons. But as Sarah looked at Sophia's face, she realized something that Volkov had missed in his careful planning. He had researched Ghost the operative, studied her methods and her psychology, learned everything about her professional capabilities. But he had never understood Sarah the librarian, the woman who had spent 18 years caring for other people's children, who had built a life around protecting and nurturing instead of destroying. Ghost might have been willing to make deals with devils to complete missions, but Sarah Chun would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt a child she cared about. I need to think about your proposal, Sarah said, buying time while her mind raced through possibilities. It's a big decision. Of course, Volkov replied. Take all the time you need. We have nowhere to be, and the tide won't turn for several hours. But Sarah was no longer thinking about Volkov's timeline. She was thinking about the lighthouse's structure, the positions of his men, the various ways this could end. And she was remembering that sometimes the best way to win an impossible situation was to change the rules entirely. All right, she said finally. I accept your proposal, but I have some conditions of my own. Volkov raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Conditions? You are hardly in a position to negotiate terms. Sarah moved slightly closer to the center of the room, positioning herself for what she hoped wouldn't be necessary, but was increasingly inevitable. First condition, the girl goes home now, before any business discussions begin. Absolutely not. She's my insurance that you will honor our agreement. Second condition, we conduct our future business through intermediaries. I don't work directly with people who threaten children. Volkov's smile turned predatory. Again, no. I require direct oversight to ensure you don't develop any unfortunate ideas about betraying our arrangement. Sarah nodded as if she had expected these responses, which she had. Volkov was following exactly the pattern she remembered from Syria. Arrogant, controlling, and convinced that his superior position made him untouchable. It was the same overconfidence that had allowed her to get close enough to destroy his organization the first time. Third condition, she continued, taking another small step forward. I want your word that no matter what happens between us, Sofia Rodriguez and her mother will never be targets again. You have my word, Volkov said easily. Once our business is concluded, they will be of no further interest to me. It was exactly the answer Sarah had been waiting for. Volkov's definition of concluded business would inevitably include her death, which meant he had no intention of honoring any agreement about Elena and Sofia's safety. He was lying, which meant the time for negotiation was over. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. That tells me everything I need to know. She moved with the fluid speed that had once made Ghost legendary among special operations circles. Her first target was the man holding Sofia, not because he was the greatest threat, but because removing him would get the child clear of the immediate danger zone. The knife that had looked like a letter opener buried itself in his shoulder, and his surprised shout filled the lighthouse as he stumbled backward and lost his grip on Sofia. Run upstairs, Sarah shouted to Sofia. Get as high as you can and stay down. The second gunman was already raising his weapon, but Sarah was inside his firing arc before he could acquire a target. Years of civilian life hadn't dulled her muscle memory, and the moves came back as naturally as breathing. A strike to his wrist made him drop the rifle. An elbow to his solar plexus doubled him over, and a knee to his head sent him crashing into the lighthouse wall. Volkov was drawing his pistol, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. You stupid woman. You'll get the child killed. The child was dead the moment you decided to use her, Sarah replied, rolling behind an overturned table as Volkov's first shot splintered the wood where her head had been. You never intended to let either of us live. She could hear Morrison's voice in her earpiece, urgent and demanding status updates, but she couldn't spare attention for conversation. The wounded gunman was trying to retrieve his rifle with his good arm, and Volkov was moving to get a better angle for his next shot. Sarah's own pistol appeared in her hand, as if by magic, and she put 2 rounds center mass into the wounded gunman before he could rearm himself. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and she used the moment of acoustic shock to change positions. Federal agents, came a voice from outside the lighthouse. The building is surrounded. Release the hostage and surrender immediately. Volkov cursed in Russian, realizing that his carefully planned operation was falling apart. You brought backup. That was not our agreement. We never had an agreement, Sarah called back, moving again to avoid giving him a stationary target. You had demands, and I had a child to rescue. The remaining gunman was trying to use the narrow stairs as cover while working his way down to support Volkov. Sarah could see his boots at the edge of her vision, but couldn't get a clear shot without exposing herself to Volkov's position. Then, she heard Sophia's voice from somewhere high above. Ms. Chun, there's a light up here. A big light that turns on. Sarah understood immediately. The lighthouse beacon hadn't been operational in 15 years, but if the power was still connected, if the mechanism still functioned. Sophia, sweetheart, can you see a big switch or button near the light? Yes, it's red. When I count to 3, I want you to press it as hard as you can, okay? 1, 2, 3. The lighthouse beacon blazed to life, sending a brilliant beam of light sweeping across the interior of the building. Volkov and his remaining man were both caught off guard by the sudden illumination, their night vision destroyed in an instant. Sarah didn't waste the opportunity. Her next shot took down the man on the stairs, and she rolled out of cover to engage Volkov directly. But the arms dealer was more experienced than his hired help, and despite being temporarily blinded, he managed to return fire accurately enough to force Sarah back into cover. You cannot win this, Ghost. Volkov shouted over the sound of the beacon's rotating mechanism. Even if you kill me, there are others who know where you are, others who will come for the people you care about. Then, I'll deal with them too, Sarah replied, reloading quickly and professionally. It's what I do. She could hear movement outside the lighthouse. Morrison's team moving into position, probably preparing to breach the building. But Sarah knew that any assault from outside would put Sophia at risk from stray fire or desperate actions by Volkov. This had to end here, now, between the two people who had started it 23 years ago in a Syrian warehouse. Sarah feinted to the left, drawing Volkov's fire, then broke cover to the right. His shot went wide, and hers didn't. Volkov stumbled backward, clutching his chest, his pistol clattering across the lighthouse floor. 23 years, he whispered, sinking to his knees. 23 years I planned for this moment. You planned for Ghost, Sarah said, keeping her weapon trained on him as she moved closer. You never understood, Sarah-chan. Volkov's breathing was becoming labored, but his eyes remained focused and aware. What is the difference? Ghost was a soldier. She followed orders and completed missions. Sarah-chan is a librarian. She protects children. The lighthouse door burst open, and Morrison entered with a full tactical team, weapons raised and ready. But the threat was already neutralized. Volkov was dying. His remaining gunmen were down, and Sarah was holstering her weapon with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Clear, Morrison shouted. Building secure. Medical team to the lighthouse. Sarah was already moving toward the stairs, calling upstairs to Sophia. Sweetheart, it's safe now. You can come down. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, scared but unharmed, and threw herself into Sarah's arms with the complete trust that only children possessed. I knew you'd save me, Miss Chun. I knew you wouldn't leave me here. As Sarah held the trembling child, she felt the weight of the last 18 years settling back on her shoulders. The quiet life, the peaceful routine, the sense of safety and normalcy, all of it was over. There would be debriefings and official reports, background investigations, and security assessments. The federal government would want to know how a small-town librarian had managed to neutralize 3 armed men and rescue a hostage with the efficiency of a special operations professional. But looking down at Sophia's tear-streaked face, Sarah realized she didn't care about any of that. The child was safe. Elena would have her daughter back. That was what mattered. Morrison approached carefully, his expression mixing relief with professional concern. Lee-Won, are you hurt? I'm fine. Sophia's fine. That's all that matters. We need to get you both to a hospital for evaluation, and then there are going to be a lot of questions, Jake, Sarah interrupted gently. The questions can wait. Right now, this little girl needs to see her mother. The reunion between Elena and Sophia on the mainland was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. Tears, laughter, fierce hugs, and whispered promises that they would never be separated again. Standing apart from the celebration, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with completing a mission and everything to do with knowing that a family was whole again. Detective Kowalski approached her as the emergency vehicles began to disperse. Miss Chun, I owe you an apology. When this started, I thought you were just a librarian who watched too many crime shows. I had no idea. I'm just a librarian, Sarah said firmly. Everything else is history. Is it? Because what I saw tonight didn't look like history. It looked like someone who could have that kind of training anytime she needed it. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in hours, the expression was purely genuine. Detective, I've been thinking about that. Maybe the real question isn't whether I'm Sarah-chan or Ghost. Maybe the question is whether there's a way to be both. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her library, watching the afternoon sun stream through the familiar windows. The building was full of its usual activity. Students working on projects, parents browsing with their children, elderly residents reading newspapers, and chatting quietly among themselves. Everything looked exactly as it had before Sophia's kidnapping, but Sarah knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. The people of Millfield Harbor looked at her differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity that hadn't been there before. Some knew more details than others about what had happened that night at the lighthouse, but everyone understood that their quiet librarian was more complicated than they had realized. Elena and Sophia had become regular visitors, stopping by almost daily for new books and quiet conversations. Sophia seemed remarkably resilient, treating her adventure as an exciting story rather than a traumatic experience, though Sarah knew she would be watching carefully for any delayed reactions. Officer Martinez had been promoted to detective, largely based on his handling of the federal coordination during the crisis. Detective Kowalski had quietly become one of Sarah's strongest supporters in the community, making sure that anyone who asked too many questions understood that some topics were not open for discussion. Morrison had returned to Washington, but not before offering Sarah a consulting position with his unit. "We could use someone with your skills and experience," he had said. "Someone who understands both the operational side and the human cost." Sarah had turned him down, but not before giving it serious consideration. The offer represented a chance to use her abilities for something meaningful again, to be part of something larger than organizing book clubs and helping students with research projects. But as she watched Sophia discover a new series about dragons and brave knights, Sarah realized that she was already part of something meaningful. She was part of a community that valued knowledge and learning, that trusted her to help them find the information and stories they needed, that had welcomed her 18 years ago without asking questions about her past. The hidden room in her cottage remained stocked and ready, because Sarah had learned that some precautions were worth maintaining. But the weapons and documents were backup plans, not daily realities. Ghost would always be part of who she was, but Sarah Chun was who she chose to be. As closing time approached, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that life could take. She had spent 12 years as one of the most effective covert operatives in military history, and 18 years as a small-town librarian. Both roles had required their own kinds of courage, their own forms of service, their own ways of protecting people who needed protection. Maybe Detective Kowalski had been right. Maybe the real answer wasn't choosing between Sarah Chun and Ghost, but finding a way to honor both parts of her identity. She would probably never know if other enemies from her past might surface, other threats that would require her old skills. But if they did, she would face them as herself. A librarian who happened to have extraordinary training, a protector who understood that the most important battles were often fought not for nations or ideologies, but for the safety and happiness of individual people. When Sophia waved goodbye that evening, clutching her new books and chattering excitedly to her mother about the stories she was planning to read, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Not the mission completion satisfaction of Ghost, but the quiet fulfillment of Sarah Chun, who had spent another day helping people discover new worlds through books. They had labeled her just the librarian, and she had been content with that label. But now she understood that being just the librarian was actually the perfect cover for everything she really was: protector, teacher, guide, and guardian. Some secrets were worth keeping, but some truths were worth living every single day. As she locked the library doors and walked home through the quiet streets of Millfield Harbor, Sarah Chun smiled. Tomorrow there would be new books to shelve, new readers to help, new stories to recommend. And if danger ever threatened her community again, there would be someone ready to stand between harm and innocence, someone who understood that the most important mission was simply making sure that 8-year-old girls got to grow up surrounded by books and dreams and the unshakable certainty that there were adults who would do anything to keep them safe. Ghost had come home, and this time she was staying.